Imagine waking up tomorrow and your phone can't be replaced, your car can't be repaired, your country can't build weapons, not because of a war, not because of a cyber attack, but because one shipment never arrived. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The most powerful nations in history don't rise because they're smarter. They rise because they control one thing everyone else suddenly can't live without. And right now, that thing is already gone. This isn't a prediction, it's a pattern. And history never misses twice. Every global superpower of the last 300 years followed the same script. Different countries, different centuries, same outcome, one resource, total control, global dependence, absolute leverage. And today, the resource that powers every screen, every electric motor, every missile, every fighter jet is controlled by one country, China. Before you dismiss that, let me ask you something. What happens to a civilization when the fuel that runs it gets turned off? Because this has already happened before. Let's rewind. In the early 1800s, the world was slow. Human muscle, animal labor, wind and water. That was it. Then, one black rock changed everything. Coal. Coal wasn't just fuel, it was condensed power. Burn it, boil water, create steam, move machines. And one country had more of it than anyone else. Britain. Not just coal in the ground, coal mines, coal railroads, coal-powered factories, coal-powered ships. Britain didn't just own coal. They built the entire world around it. Factories that outproduced every rival, railways that moved goods faster than armies, a navy that no wind could stop. By the mid-1800s, Britain wasn't just rich. They were unavoidable. If you wanted to trade, you used British ships. If you wanted to industrialize, you needed British coal. If you wanted power, you needed British permission. That's the first rule of history. Control the fuel, control the future. And Britain did for nearly a century, until the world changed again, because coal wasn't the future anymore. Oil was. And this time, the resource didn't crown an empire. It crowned a superpower, the United States. At first, oil was boring, lamp fuel, a replacement for whale fat. Then engines arrived, cars, planes, tanks, ships. Suddenly, oil wasn't optional. It was survival. And America was drowning in it. Texas, Oklahoma, California. By the early 1900s, the U.S. produced more oil than the rest of the world combined. But here's the part most people miss. America didn't just pump oil. They redesigned civilization around it. Highways, suburbs, refineries, airports, global supply chains. The entire American way of life ran on cheap fuel. Then came World War II, and oil decided everything. Germany ran out. Japan got cut off. The Allies never did. America fueled its own military and everyone else's. By 1945, the message was clear. If you wanted to win wars, if you wanted global influence, you needed oil, and America had it, for a while. Because monopolies never die quietly. By the 1970s, U.S. oil production peaked. Consumption kept rising. Imports filled the gap. That's when another group realized something dangerous. You don't need all the supply, you just need enough of it. Enter OPEC. Saudi Arabia and a handful of nations figured out the leverage. Control prices. Control supply. Control the world's mood. In 1973, they pulled the lever. Oil prices exploded. Gas lines wrapped around cities. Inflation crushed economies. The West panicked. And for the first time, America felt something new. Dependency. That moment should have changed everything. But it didn't. Because the world moved on again. This time, the resource wasn't energy. It was technology itself. 17 obscure elements, names no one remembers, metals no one talks about. But without them, no smartphones, no electric vehicles, no wind turbines, no advanced weapons. And one country didn't just notice early. They planned for it. In the 1990s, a Chinese leader said something almost no one outside China paid attention to. The Middle East has oil. China has rare earths. That wasn't a boast. It was a warning, because while the West outsourced, deregulated, and shut down mines, China built everything: mines, processing plants, refineries, factories. They made it cheaper for everyone else to quit. And we did. By the time anyone noticed, it was already over. Today, China controls around 90% of rare earth processing, not mining, processing. That's the choke point. You can dig the ore up anywhere, but turning it into usable material, almost entirely China, which means something terrifying. The most advanced military on Earth can't function without Chinese supply. The world's biggest tech companies can't build products without Chinese approval, and this isn't theory. China has already tested the weapon, prices spiked, industries panicked, governments backed down, and that was just a warning shot, because if history teaches us anything, it's this. Stage 1, discovery. Stage 2, infrastructure. Stage 3, monopoly. Stage 4, dependency. Stage 5, leverage. And stage 6, collapse. We are standing at stage 5 right now. And in the next part, I'll show you why escaping this trap isn't just hard, it may already be too late. Because this monopoly is unlike any before it. And when it tightens, it won't look like a crisis. It'll look like everyday life suddenly breaking. Here's the part that should scare you. This monopoly isn't just about money. It's not even just about technology. It's about time. Because every great power collapse starts the same way. Not with explosions, not with invasions, but with the slow realization that there's no quick fix. Let's talk about rare earths the way history demands we do. Most people hear the name and think, so what? Just mine more. That misunderstanding is exactly how this trap worked. Rare earth elements aren't rare because they're scarce. They're rare because they're a nightmare to process. They're mixed together, chemically stubborn, environmentally toxic to separate. 1 ton of usable rare earth metal can produce thousands of tons of waste. Radioactive waste, poisoned water, destroyed land. For decades, Western countries knew this and made a choice. We don't want this mess. China said something different. We'll take it. In the 1980s and 90s, China did what Britain did with coal, what America did with oil. They accepted the short-term cost for long-term dominance. They built processing plants when no one else would. They subsidized losses until competitors went bankrupt. They ignored environmental damage while others regulated themselves into dependence. By the early 2000s, the result was irreversible. America's largest rare earth mine, Mountain Pass, California, shut down. Not because the resource was gone, but because China made it cheaper to quit. And that's when the real lock-in happened. Because once supply chains move, they don't come back easily. Factories were redesigned around Chinese inputs. Contracts were signed assuming permanent access. Engineers stopped learning how to process rare earths outside China. An entire generation of expertise vanished. That's the part history keeps repeating. When Britain lost coal dominance, they still knew how to industrialize. When America lost oil dominance, it still had refineries. But with rare earths, the West didn't just lose production, it lost knowledge. Today, the United States mines some rare earth ore again. But here's the punchline. We ship it to China. They process it, then we buy it back. That's not independence. That's dependency wearing a disguise. And building processing plants isn't like flipping a switch, best case scenario. 7 to 10 years. That's if everything goes right. Permits, environmental lawsuits, training specialists, developing chemical separation expertise that China refined over 3 decades. And during those 10 years, demand explodes. Electric vehicles need up to 10 times more rare earths than gas cars. Wind turbines use hundreds of kilograms each. Data centers, AI hardware, consumer electronics, all scaling fast. By 2030, global demand is projected to triple. So we're not just behind, we're falling further behind every year. Now here's where the tension shifts, because China isn't just sitting on this advantage. They're preparing to use it. In 2010, during a dispute with Japan, China restricted rare earth exports. Japan's electronics industry panicked, Factories froze. Prices skyrocketed. Diplomats scrambled. China eventually loosened restrictions, not because they had to, but because the message landed. In 2019, during U.S.-China trade tensions, Chinese state media openly threatened to cut off rare earths to America. Not a rumor. A signal. The Pentagon took notice. Internal reports labeled rare earth dependence a national security threat. Because modern warfare doesn't run on bravery, it runs on magnets. The F-35 fighter jet uses nearly 1,000 pounds of rare earth materials. Precision-guided missiles rely on rare earth magnets, radar systems, stealth coatings, electric propulsion. No rare earths means no replacement parts, no new systems, no sustained conflict. And here's the most uncomfortable fact. China doesn't need to cut supply completely. They just need to tighten it, a delay, a quota, a temporary restriction. Markets panic, prices surge, companies collapse, and the leverage works without firing a single shot. This is what strategic control looks like in the 21st century. Not blockades, not battleships, supply chains. Now zoom out. History tells us monopolies always collapse eventually. So what breaks this one? New mines? Too slow. Recycling? Underdeveloped and nowhere near scale. Substitutes? Still experimental. Even optimistic forecasts admit something sobering. China has at least a 10-year window of uncontested leverage, a decade where any major geopolitical conflict, any Taiwan escalation, any trade war runs straight through rare earths. And China knows it. They're stockpiling, securing overseas deposits, locking in long-term contracts. They're not acting like a country afraid of losing control. They're acting like one preparing to use it, and this is where the historical pattern tightens. Because Stage 5, exploitation, is the most dangerous phase. Britain used coal to expand empire. America used oil to enforce order. OPEC used oil to extract wealth. China's leverage is different. Rare earths aren't just energy. They're embedded in everything. Your phone, your car, your medical equipment, your power grid, your military. Cut oil, and economies slow. Cut rare earths, modern life fractures. And that brings us to the question history always asks next. What happens when the dependent world realizes it waited too long? Because the next stage doesn't begin with shortages. It begins with panic. And in Part 3, we are going to confront the hardest question of all. What does collapse actually look like in a world that can replace its most critical resource? And when it comes, will it arrive as a crisis or as silence? There's a moment in every historical collapse that looks boring in real time. No alarms, no headlines screaming the end. Just things not working the way they used to. That's how this ends too, not with war, with absence, no announcement, no declaration. Just delays, shortages, back orders that never clear, and people asking the same question empires always ask too late. How did this happen so quietly? Let's imagine the trigger. It doesn't have to be a full cutoff. China wouldn't need to do something dramatic. All it takes is a reason, a Taiwan crisis, new sanctions, a temporary export control justified as environmental protection or domestic demand. Rare earth shipments slow. At first, companies say it's manageable. They tap inventories. They reassure investors. Then the countdown begins. Because most manufacturers hold weeks, not years, of supply. Electronics plants miss deadlines. Automotive factories idle lines. Defense contractors delay programs. Prices spike, not gradually, violently. Neodymium prices soar. Magnet shortages ripple outward. EV production stalls. Consumers feel it last, but they always feel it. New phones get delayed. Laptops double in price. EV wait lists stretch into years. And then something deeper breaks. Confidence. Markets hate uncertainty. And this isn't a shortage with a clear end. There's no alternate supplier waiting in the wings. No emergency switch to flip. Government scramble. Emergency funding. Strategic stockpiles released. Recycling mandates rush through. But history is unforgiving here. You can't compress decades of infrastructure into months. Britain couldn't rebuild coal dominance once oil took over. America couldn't stop OPEC once dependency set in. And the rare earth trap is tighter than anything before it. Because it's not one industry, it's all of them. Energy transition slows to a crawl. Military modernization freezes. Tech innovation bottlenecks. The very tools meant to solve future crises become unavailable during one. And here's the darkest twist. China wouldn't even need to benefit directly. The damage alone is leverage. Every negotiation shifts, every alliance recalculates, every sanction gets second-guessed. Because when your economy is tied to a rival's supply chain, you don't act freely, you act carefully. This is what historians will write. Not that the West lost a war, but that it lost optionality, the ability to choose. And that's the final stage of the pattern, not collapse through destruction, collapse through constraint. Now zoom out one last time. Britain's coal monopoly lasted a century. America's oil dominance lasted a generation. OPEC's leverage burned bright, then faded. China's rare earth control is still consolidating. More processing plants, more downstream manufacturing, more lock-in. And unlike oil or coal, there is no obvious replacement waiting in the wings. That's why this matters. Not as a headline, not as fear, but as history repeating itself with modern tools, because every age believes it's immune. Every empire assumes markets will adapt, that innovation will arrive just in time. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the cost isn't paid in headlines, it's paid in years. Lost growth, lost leverage, lost autonomy. The rare earth trap isn't about China winning, it's about everyone else discovering they already lost a move 10 years ago. So the real question isn't whether China will use this power. History says monopolies always do. The question is whether we recognize the pattern early enough to break it. Because once the silence starts, the story is already written. If this changed how you see technology, history, and power, subscribe. History doesn't repeat because it wants to. It repeats because people forget. And the next chapter is already unfolding.